The neon sign flickered above the dusty diner on the edge of Route 66, casting a weary red glow over the cracked asphalt parking lot. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when the desert wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush, carrying the faint scent of rain that never came. Inside, the air was thick with the sizzle of grease and the low hum of a jukebox playing forgotten country tunes. Olivia Harper wiped down the counter for the third time that night, her hands raw from the cheap bleach, her mind drifting to the stack of unpaid bills waiting at home. At 28, she was a survivor, scarred by a childhood of broken promises from a father who rode off into the sunset and never looked back. But she kept showing up, serving coffee to truckers and stragglers, because that's what you did when the world tried to grind you down. That's when the door slammed open, letting in a gust of hot wind and the high-pitched wail of a little girl. Lily couldn't have been more than 7, her pigtails disheveled, a faded pink dress smeared with dirt and what looked like traces of struggle. She stumbled forward, clutching a stuffed bear to her chest, tears carving clean paths down her grimy cheeks. Behind her, 2 rough-looking men in faded flannel shirts barged in, their faces twisted with impatience and something darker. Entitlement, maybe. Or the kind of anger that brews in men who think the world owes them. "There you are, you little brat," the taller one growled, his voice like gravel under tires. He reached for her arm, but Lily darted behind the counter, her sobs echoing off the formica surfaces. Olivia's heart seized. She'd seen enough in her years slinging hash to know when fear was real. The girl trembled, whispering, "Please, don't let them take me," as if Olivia were a lifeline in a storm. Without a second thought, Olivia stepped between them, her apron still tied tight, a coffee pot in one hand like a makeshift shield. "Hey, easy now," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. "She's just a kid. What's going on here?" The men sneered, the shorter one leaning in close enough for her to smell the stale beer on his breath. "Mind your business, waitress. This ain't your fight. Girls ours. Family matter." But Olivia didn't budge. She'd made a silent vow years ago after her own mother vanished into the night, leaving her to fend for scraps, protect the vulnerable, no matter the cost. "Family doesn't drag a child in crying like that," she shot back, her eyes locked on theirs. "You touch her, you go through me." The diner fell silent, the jukebox skipping on a sad refrain. A few late-night patrons shifted uncomfortably in their booths, but no one moved. The men advanced, one grabbing Lily's shoulder, pulling her toward the door. She screamed, a piercing sound that cut through the night like a siren's call. Olivia lunged, shoving the man back with surprising force, her voice rising. "Get your hands off her! I'm calling the sheriff!" Chaos erupted. The coffee pot clattered to the floor, hot liquid splashing across the tiles, steam rising like ghosts in the dim light. From the shadows of the parking lot, headlights pierced the darkness. A lone motorcycle rumbled to life, its engine a deep, throaty roar that drowned out the scuffle. Ethan Ridge Callahan, leader of the Iron Vipers, had pulled in 10 minutes earlier for a black coffee and a moment's peace. At 42, he was a mountain of a man, tattoos snaking up his arms like old war stories, his leather cut patched with the emblem of a coiled serpent. He'd ridden these roads for decades, haunted by a promise made in the smoke of a battlefield 20 years back, to a brother in arms who died saving his life. Watch over the lost ones, Ridge. Be the shield they never had. Ethan had buried that oath under layers of grease and gravel, leading his crew through bar fights and border runs. But tonight, something stirred. He watched from his bike as the scene unfolded, the little girl's terror mirroring the vulnerability he'd once ignored in his own fractured family. Dismounting with a creak of boots on pavement, Ethan strode in, his presence filling the doorway like a storm cloud. The men turned, sizing him up, but his gaze was steel, unyielding, the kind forged in fires no one else could see. "You heard the lady?" he said, voice low and even like the rumble before thunder. "Let the girl go." The taller man laughed, a bark that didn't reach his eyes. "This your business, biker boy? Walk away." But Ethan didn't. He stepped closer, close enough to see the fear flicker in their postures. Lily peeked out from behind Olivia, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread. In that moment, Ethan felt the weight of his forgotten promise crash down, the oath to protect, to stand when others wouldn't. One wrong move, and this could end in blood, but he couldn't ride away. Not again. The standoff stretched, the air electric with tension. Olivia's breath came in shallow bursts, her hands clenched at her sides, ready to fight if words failed. The men hesitated, glancing at Ethan's broad frame, the glint of a chain around his neck that spoke of battles won and lost. Finally, the shorter one muttered a curse and backed toward the door, dragging his partner with him. "This ain't over," he spat, but they slunk into the night, their truck peeling out with a spray of gravel. Lily collapsed into Olivia's arms, sobbing softly. The stuffed bear pressed between them. Ethan knelt to her level, his rough hand gentle on her shoulder. "You're safe now, kid. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." As the adrenaline faded, Olivia looked up at him, exhaustion and gratitude warring in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping Lily's face with a napkin. Ethan nodded, but inside gears were turning. He'd seen the fire in this waitress, the same unyielding spirit that had kept him alive through wars and wanderings. And the girl. She reminded him of his own niece, lost to the system years ago, a wound that never healed. "What's your story?" he asked Olivia, pulling out a stool at the counter. She hesitated, then began to talk about the long shifts, the dreams deferred, the way life had a habit of kicking you when you were down. Lily, it turned out, had slipped away from a foster home, chased by relatives who saw her as a burden, not blood. Ethan listened, the diner's clock ticking like a heartbeat. By the time the sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn, he'd made a decision. His crew was scattered across the state. 54 strong, bound by loyalty, forged in the crucible of shared scars. A single call, and they'd ride, for this girl, for this woman who'd stood alone. It was more than intervention. It was redemption, a chance to honor the promise he'd let gather dust. As he stepped out into the cooling air, the scent of dew on metal filling his lungs, Ethan fired up his phone. "Brothers," he said into the void, "we got a ride at first light, one that matters." The desert stretched endless before him, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt the pull of purpose, not the roar of engines alone, but the quiet thunder of doing right. Olivia watched from the window, Lily asleep on a booth cushion, unaware that her act of defiance had sparked a chain reaction. A biker gang, hardened by the road, was about to become her shield, and in the heart of it all, an old promise would bind them, changing lives in ways none could foresee. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon like fingers of gold, painting the diner's windows in hues of amber and rose. The air outside hummed with the tentative chirp of desert birds, a stark contrast to the night's earlier fury. Inside, Olivia Harper cradled Lily's small form against her side, the girl's breathing steady now, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm like a faithful sentinel. The counter bore the scars of the confrontation. Spilled coffee cooling in dark pools, a shattered mug swept into a dustpan nearby. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she poured fresh brew into 2 mugs, the steam rising in lazy spirals that carried the bitter, comforting aroma of roasted beans. She slid one across to Ethan, who sat on the stool like a sentinel himself, his leather jacket creaking softly with each measured breath. "You didn't have to do that," Olivia said, her voice a quiet thread in the morning hush. She met his eyes, those deep-set blues, etched with lines from too many sunrises on the road. Ethan took the mug, the heat seeping through the ceramic into his calloused palms, grounding him. At 42, he'd learned that words were like engine oil, slick and necessary, but they could slip away if not handled right. "Had to," he replied simply, sipping the coffee black as midnight. "Seen too many folks walk away from what matters. Ain't my style." Lily stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal wide, trusting eyes that searched Olivia's face first, then Ethan's. The girl didn't speak, but the way she clutched the bear tighter spoke volumes, a silent vow of her own, born from nights of uncertainty. As the diner filled with the soft glow of morning, Olivia shared more than she'd intended. Words spilled out like the coffee she'd mopped up, fragments of a life pieced together from diner shifts and solitary evenings. Her father, a drifter with a laugh like thunder, had promised to return after one last ride, leaving her with a mother who faded into shadows of despair. "I was Lily's age when he rode off," Olivia confessed, her gaze drifting to the window where the desert sands shimmered like a mirage. "Learned early that promises are just wind, gone before you feel them." Ethan nodded, the chain around his neck, a simple silver medallion engraved with a faded eagle, catching the light. It was a relic from his army days, a token from his fallen brother Marcus, who'd pressed it into his hand amid the chaos of dust and distant gunfire. "Watch the lost ones, Ridge," Marcus had whispered, his voice ragged. "Be the wall they lean on." Ethan had carried it like a ghost, leading the Iron Vipers through runs that skirted the law, but never fully honoring that oath until now. The door jingled again, not with threat this time, but with the arrival of the diner's owner, a grizzled woman named Mabel, who eyed the scene with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Trouble last night?" she asked, tying her apron with efficient knots. Olivia waved it off, but Ethan stood, his boots thudding softly on the linoleum. "Handled," he said, leaving a crisp 20 on the counter, more than enough for the coffee and the mess. He stepped outside, the cool dawn air brushing his face like a benediction, carrying the faint tang of sage and distant rain. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the call he'd placed just before the sky lightened. The first response came from Jax, his second-in-command, a wiry veteran with scars from the same war that had claimed Marcus. "On my way, boss. What's the ride?" Ethan leaned against his Harley, the bike's chrome gleaming like polished armor under the rising sun. He explained in clipped tones, the girl, the waitress, the men who'd slunk away like coyotes in defeat. "This ain't about territory or payback," he said, his voice steady as the engines idle. "It's about standing for something. She's got no one, Jax. Neither did we back then." There was a pause on the line, the kind that bridged years of brotherhood. Jax's reply came firm. "Crew's rallying. 54 strong like always. We'll meet at the old crossroads by 7. Ethan pocketed the phone, a weight lifting from his shoulders, replaced by the familiar surge of purpose. The Vipers weren't saints, tattooed wanderers bound by code more than blood, but they were family chosen in the fires of loss. Mechanics, ex-cops, wanderers who'd found solace in the roar of engines and the loyalty of the road. Back inside, Lily had perked up, nibbling on a piece of toast Olivia had buttered with care. The girl's story emerged in halting whispers. Relatives who'd taken her in after her parents' accident, but treated her like an afterthought, their home a place of raised voices and slammed doors. "They said I was in the way," she murmured, her small fingers tracing patterns in the crumbs. Olivia's jaw tightened, a flicker of her own buried anger surfacing. She'd called the local shelter at first light, but the line had been busy. Voices on the other end, promising paperwork that felt like chains. Ethan watched the exchange, the way Olivia's hand rested protectively on Lily's back, and saw echoes of his niece, Sarah, spirited away by a system that valued forms over faces. He'd failed her once, riding away instead of fighting, not this time. By mid-morning, the diner buzzed with a different energy. Truckers filtered in, their conversations a low rumble over plates of eggs and bacon, the sizzle of the grill punctuating the air like punctuation marks. Ethan lingered at the counter, nursing a second coffee, his mind mapping the ride ahead. The Vipers would converge from dusty towns and forgotten highways, their bikes a thunderous convoy that turned heads and silenced doubts. But it wasn't just about numbers. It was the promise reignited, the moral compass spinning true after years adrift. Olivia caught his eye as she refilled a patron's mug, a silent question in her glance. "Why us?" she asked when the rush eased, leaning on the counter, her apron dusted with flour from an impromptu pancake batch for Lily. Ethan set his mug down, the ceramic clinking like a vow sealed. "Because you stood up. Reminds me of someone I let down long ago. This crew? We're the ones who ride for the forgotten, and that girl. She's not going back to whatever hell they pulled her from." Lily looked up, her smile tentative but real, the first crack in her shell of fear. Outside, the sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt until it shimmered, the horizon calling like an old friend. Ethan felt the pull, the road, the brotherhood, the chance at redemption. As he fired up his engine later that hour, the deep growl vibrating through his bones, Olivia waved from the door, Lily peeking from behind her skirt. The dust trail rose behind him, a veil between what was and what could be, but the real ride was just beginning, a convoy forging ahead on threads of loyalty and unspoken oaths, ready to shield the vulnerable from the storm. The sun hung high over the cracked expanse of the old crossroads, turning the air into a shimmering haze that distorted the horizon like a fever dream. Ethan Ridge Callahan idled his Harley at the dusty intersection, the engine's low purr vibrating through the leather seat and into his bones, a rhythm as familiar as his own heartbeat. Sagebrush clawed at the edges of the gravel, releasing a sharp, earthy scent that mingled with the hot metal tang of cooling exhaust. He'd arrived early, the weight of his decision settling like dust on his shoulders. 54 riders, scattered like seeds across the wind-swept map of the state, now converging on this forgotten point where two forgotten roads met. It wasn't a raid or a rumble, it was a stand, born from the flicker of a little girl's fear and a waitress's unyielding spine. The first bikes appeared on the horizon, a lone headlight cutting through the glare, followed by the thunder of more. Jax rolled up first, his customized chopper kicking up a rooster tail of dirt, his salt and pepper beard framing a face etched with the same quiet resolve Ethan knew so well. They clasped forearms in greeting, the ritual silent but binding, like links in a chain forged from shared silences. "Crew's coming steady," Jack said, killing his engine and swinging a leg over. "Heard the call. Girl in trouble. Waitress with fire. Reminds me of that dust-up in '09, the one with the kid on the border." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the approaching dots that grew into a procession. Memories surfaced unbidden. Marcus's last breath, the medallion heavy in his fist, the promise whispered amid the acrid smoke of far-off sands. "This one's personal," he replied, voice gravel rough. "No one's touching that kid, not while we draw breath." Back at the diner, the midday lull brought a deceptive calm, the jukebox humming a melancholic ballad about lost highways and second chances. Olivia wiped down the counter with mechanical precision, her mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and half-formed plans. Lily sat in a booth, colouring on a napkin with crayons scavenged from the lost and found, her small world reduced to strokes of blue and green that hinted at safer skies. The girl's presence was a balm and a burden. Olivia had grown attached in those fragile hours, seeing her own younger self in the wide-eyed trust. But reality intruded with the ring of the phone behind the counter, Mabel answering in her no-nonsense bark. "Yeah, sheriff's office, hold on." She covered the receiver, eyes narrowing at Olivia. Some folks called in, said there was a ruckus last night. Relatives of the girl, claiming she's theirs to take. Olivia's stomach twisted, a cold knot forming as she took the phone. The voice on the other end was official, laced with the weariness of too many cases. "Ma'am, we're sending someone out. Child services too. You did right keeping her safe, but we need to sort this proper." Proper. The word tasted like ash. Olivia glanced at Lily, who looked up with a crayon paused mid-stroke, sensing the shift in the air like a deer scents a predator. "She's scared, officer," Olivia said, her tone firm but edged with plea. "Those men, they weren't gentle. Give us time." The line went quiet, then clicked off with promises of arrival by afternoon. Mabel shook her head, muttering about paperwork swallowing souls. But Olivia felt the walls closing in. Her own past echoed, nights waiting for a father who never returned, the system that shuffled her like a forgotten card. She wouldn't let it claim Lily. Outside, the parking lot baked under the relentless sun, heat waves dancing off the asphalt like restless spirits. Ethan had left his number scribbled on a napkin, a lifeline in the storm, and now Olivia's fingers hovered over her phone, debating the call. Pride warred with desperation. She'd stood alone before, but this felt bigger, a tide pulling at her resolve. Finally, she dialed, the ringtone cutting through the diner's hum like a distant siren. Ethan's voice answered on the second buzz, steady as an anchor. "Ridge." "It's Olivia," she said, words tumbling out. The call from the law, the relatives circling like shadows, the fear that Lily would vanish into some indifferent machine. There was a pause, the faint roar of engines in the background, swelling like an approaching wave. "Hold tight," he said. "Crew's assembling. We'll be there before they roll up. You and the girl aren't facing this solo." At the crossroads, the iron vipers materialized one by one, a symphony of growling Harleys and custom rides that turned the dust into a golden cloud. There was Tyler, the ex-firefighter with burns hidden under his sleeves, pulling up with a nod that spoke of fires fought and oaths kept. Beside him, Nathan, a quiet mechanic whose hands bore the grease of loyalty, and further back, a cluster of veterans like Samuel and Logan, their faces maps of old wounds. 54 in total, not a number but a bond, chosen family, pieced together from the wreckage of wars, jobs lost, and roads that led nowhere. They formed a loose circle around Ethan, boots crunching gravel, the air thick with the scent of leather and resolve. Jacks passed around water bottles, the condensation beading like sweat on tan skin, while Ethan laid out the plan in clipped sentences. Ride to the diner, stand as witnesses, ensure the girl stayed with those who saw her as more than a file. But beneath the logistics stirred deeper currents. Ethan caught Tyler's eye, the man who'd lost a sister to the same bureaucratic grind years back. "This ride's for Marcus too," Ethan said, touching the medallion at his throat, its eagle glinting like a beacon. Murmurs rippled through the group, affirmations unspoken but felt, the promise that bound them wasn't just ink on leather, but blood and breath, a shield against the world's indifference. Engines revved in unison, a deep chorus that echoed across the flats, scattering birds into the sky. The convoy formed, a steel serpent uncoiling toward the diner, dust trailing like a banner of intent. Olivia hung up the phone, a fragile calm settling as she knelt beside Lily. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered. Brushing a stray hair from the girl's forehead, the stuffed bear watched with button eyes, a silent guardian. Outside, the first distant rumble reached her ears, not thunder, but the herald of thunder on two wheels. The Vipers were coming, their arrival a promise fulfilled, weaving redemption into the fabric of the day. Yet as the sound grew, Olivia glimpsed a battered truck idling at the road's edge, the same men from the night before, watching with narrowed eyes. The standoff loomed, not with fists, but with the weight of truth. loyalty crashing against corruption like waves on unyielding rock. In that moment, the diner felt less like a refuge and more like the eye of the storm, where choices forged legacies in the heat of honor. The dust cloud swelled like a living thing on the horizon, a golden serpent twisting under the merciless afternoon sun. Olivia Harper stood frozen at the diner's window, her palm pressed against the cool glass, the faint vibration of approaching engines humming through the frame and into her veins. Lily tugged at her apron, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and lingering wariness, the stuffed bear dangling limply from her small hand. "Are they friends?" the girl whispered, her voice a fragile thread amid the jukebox's fading melody. Olivia nodded, though doubt gnawed at her edges. Friends in leather and chrome, a far cry from the quiet life she'd scraped together. Outside, the battered truck lingered at the road's shoulder, its engine idling with a ragged cough. The two men inside, silhouettes of shadowed intent, their gazes fixed on the diner like hawks on a field mouse. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of cooling coffee and frying oil, the grill's residual heat casting wavering shadows across the checkered floor. Mabel bustled in the kitchen, her mutters a low counterpoint to the rising rumble, wiping sweat from her brow with a flour-dusted sleeve. "Never a dull shift," she grumbled, but there was a spark in her eyes, the kind that comes from witnessing resolve in unexpected forms. Olivia scooped Lily into her arms, the girl's weight a grounding anchor, and moved toward the door. Her heart pounded a staccato rhythm, echoing the thunder growing louder. Closer, a convoy that promised protection but carried the unpredictability of the open road. She'd placed her trust in a stranger's word, in the gravel rough voice of a man who'd seen too much and walked away from less. Now, as the first bikes crested the rise, she wondered if this was salvation or just another storm rolling in. Ethan Ridge Callahan led the pack, his Harley cutting through the haze like a blade, the wind whipping his graying hair beneath the bandana tied against the grit. Flanked by Jax on one side and Tyler on the other, the Iron Vipers stretched out in a disciplined line, 54 machines growling in unison, their chrome accents flashing like signals in the glare. The air filled with the sharp bite of exhaust and sun-baked rubber, a symphony that drowned out the desert's whisper. Ethan felt the medallion at his throat warm against his skin, Marcus's eagle a talisman pressing him forward. This wasn't vengeance, it was vigilance, a stand against the shadows that preyed on the small and unseen. He'd led runs before, border skirmishes, charity rides through forgotten towns, but none tugged at the buried oath like this. The girl, Lily with her quiet terror, Olivia with her unbreaking stance. They were the lost ones, the ones his brother had charged him to shield. The convoy slowed as they neared the diner, engines cutting to a chorus of pops and sighs, boots hitting pavement in a scattered rhythm. Dust settled slowly, revealing the riders dismounting with practiced ease. Hardened faces softened by purpose. Tattoos peeking from rolled sleeves like chapters in unspoken stories. Jax scanned the truck at the roadside, his hand resting casually near his belt, while Tyler, the ex-firefighter, positioned himself near the entrance, his broad frame a barrier of quiet strength. Ethan strode forward, his shadow falling long across the lot, eyes locking on the truck's occupants. The men inside shifted, one cracking his window, but they didn't move, yet. "Easy, brothers," Ethan called low to his crew, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We're here to witness, not wage war. Let the truth do the talking." Olivia pushed open the door, the bell jingling like a hesitant welcome, Lily peeking from behind her legs. The sight of the Vipers, leather vests patched with coiled serpents, faces weathered by wind and worry, should have intimidated. But there was an undercurrent of steadiness. A family forged not by blood, but by choices in the dark. Ethan approached, his boots crunching gravel, stopping a respectful distance away. "Told you we'd ride," he said to Olivia, his gaze softening as it fell on Lily. The girl clutched her bear tighter, but a small nod escaped her. Trust budding like a desert flower after rain. "These are the vipers," Olivia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "My backup." A faint smile tugged at Ethan's lips, the first crack in his stoic facade. "More than that, we're the line they won't cross." The sheriff's cruiser arrived minutes later, its siren a muted wail that cut through the tension like a knife. Dust swirled as it pulled up beside the truck, two officers emerging, one portly with a clipboard, the other lean and watchful. Child services followed in a nondescript sedan, a woman in a crisp blouse stepping out with a folder thick as a Bible. The relatives from the truck disembarked, their postures defiant but edged with unease, the taller one gesturing vaguely toward Lily. "She's family," he insisted, voice raised to carry over the murmur of the bikers. "Ours to handle. This waitress meddled." The officer turned to Olivia, notepad in hand, but before she could speak, Ethan stepped forward, his presence a calm monolith. "Meddled. She protected a child from harm. We all saw it or heard the call. Girl's terrified of you. That's not family. That's fear." Voices overlapped in the heat, a cacophony of claims and counters, the relatives spinning tales of reluctant guardianship, the social worker probing with measured questions, her pen scratching like claws on paper. Lily shrank against Olivia, whispering fragments of her ordeal, raised voices, rough hands, a home that felt like a cage. The vipers stood sentinel, a ring of leather and loyalty, their silence more eloquent than shouts. Jax murmured details to the lean officer, recounting the night's shadows without embellishment, while Tyler knelt to Lily's level, offering a gentle word about brave hearts. Ethan watched it unfold, the medallion a steady pulse against his chest, Marcus's promise alive in the fray. This was the ethical tightrope, authority corrupted by indifference, justice bent by bureaucracy. But the crew's unity tipped the scale, their chosen bond, a force no form could dismiss. As the sun dipped toward the jagged peaks, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the lot, the social worker pulled Olivia aside. "Preliminary checks show concerns," she said softly, glancing at the relatives who paced like caged animals. "We'll need time, interviews, evaluations. But for now, the child stays with you, under supervision." Relief washed over Olivia like cool water, her arms tightening around Lily, who finally smiled, a tentative bloom. The relatives slunk back to their truck, engines roaring in defeat as they peeled away, tails of dust marking their retreat. The officers nodded to Ethan, a grudging respect in their eyes, bikers as allies, an unlikely alliance born of moral clarity. The vipers lingered as the officials departed, the air cooling with the promise of twilight, sage-scented breezes stirring the gravel. Ethan clasped Olivia's hand briefly, a gesture rough but sincere. "This ain't over," he said, "but you've got us now. Ride's just starting." Lily reached out, touching his knee with wonder, the bear's paw brushing leather. In that touch, redemption flickered, not explosive, but enduring, a quiet victory woven from loyalty's thread. The diner, once a solitary outpost, now pulsed with new life, the horizon no longer empty, but filled with the echo of engines and oaths renewed. If this story's stirring something in you, hit that like button. It helps spread these tales of quiet courage far and wide. Twilight's purple veil draped over the diner like a shroud, the last embers of sunset bleeding into the jagged silhouette of distant mountains. The air cooled rapidly, carrying the crisp bite of night-blooming jasmine from the roadside scrub, mingling with the lingering haze of exhaust that hung low over the parking lot. Olivia Harper stood on the weathered steps, Lily's small hand enveloped in hers, the girl's fingers sticky from a half-eaten ice cream cone she'd coaxed from Mabel's secret stash. The iron vipers milled about in loose clusters, their bikes lined up like silent guardians, chrome catching the fading light in fleeting sparks. Laughter rippled through the group. Low, rumbling exchanges that spoke of battles shared and burdens lightened, breaking the day's tension like a released breath. Ethan Ridge Callahan leaned against his Harley, arms crossed over his broad chest, the medallion at his throat glinting faintly as he watched Olivia. She'd changed in the hours since dawn, her posture straighter, the shadows under her eyes softened by a spark of defiance rekindled. Lily tugged her hand, pointing at a rider named Samuel, who was showing off a custom flame decal on his tank with exaggerated flair. The girl's giggle cut through the evening hush, a sound pure and unscarred, pulling smiles from even the most weathered faces. Ethan felt it stir something deep, an echo of the niece he'd lost to the system's indifferent churn. Sarah's laughter, faint now in memory, but alive in this moment. "She's got spirit," he said to Jax, who stood nearby, polishing a smudge from his handlebars with a rag that smelled of oil and old leather. Jax nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where the relative's truck had vanished. "Yeah, and you've got that look, boss, the one that says this ride's far from done." Ethan grunted in agreement, the weight of his brother's promise settling heavier now, not as a chain, but as a compass. The Vipers weren't just a club. They were a covenant, forged in the aftermath of wars that left scars deeper than skin. Tyler wandered over, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the faded ink of a firefighting badge intertwined with a serpent, a nod to his dual life. "Heard from the social worker's office," he said quietly, voice like gravel under tires. "Those relatives, they've got a history. Skipped hearings, debts piling up, but the system's slow. They might push back hard." Inside the diner, the fluorescent lights buzzed to life, casting a warm halo over the booths where a few Vipers had claimed seats, nursing sodas and plates of Mabel's famous apple pie. The scent of cinnamon and butter wafted out, a comforting counterpoint to the cooling night. Olivia settled Lily at a window table, the girl's eyes heavy but bright, tracing the shapes of the riders outside like stars in a new constellation. "They look like knights," Lily murmured, her stuffed bear propped up as if listening. Olivia smiled, brushing a crumb from her cheek. "More like wolves with good hearts," she replied, her mind racing ahead to the uncertainties. The temporary stay was a victory, but fragile. Paperwork loomed like storm clouds, and those men with their shadowed eyes wouldn't fade quietly. Ethan pushed through the door, the bell tinkling softly, and slid into the booth across from them. His presence filled the space, not imposing but reassuring, like the steady hum of an engine on a long haul. "Mind if I join?" he asked, though it was more statement than question. Olivia nodded, pouring him a coffee from a fresh pot, the steam curling between them like unspoken words. "What's next?" she ventured, her voice laced with the exhaustion of a day that had upended her world. Ethan sipped, the bitter heat grounding him, before setting the mug down with a soft clink. "We wait for the full report, but we're not leaving you hanging. Couple of the boys, Nathan and Logan, they've got ties to folks who know the ins and outs, quiet inquiries, no drama." As night deepened, the desert came alive with subtle sounds, the chirp of crickets in the brush, the distant howl of a coyote echoing off the rocks, the soft creak of leather as riders shifted in conversation. Outside, the convoy's energy simmered down, but vigilance lingered. Jax circling the lot with watchful eyes, Tyler sharing stories by a cluster of bikes that drew Lily to the window, her nose pressed to the glass. Ethan opened up then, in the diner's insulated glow, fragments of his past spilling out like loose gravel. The war, the brother lost in a blur of sand and shouts, the oath that had driven him to the road instead of roots. "Marcus made me promise to watch for the ones who slip through," he said, his gaze on Lily, who dozed now with her head on Olivia's lap. "Thought I'd forgotten, but seeing you stand up, it hit like a kickstart." Olivia listened, her hand absently stroking Lily's hair, the rhythm soothing her own frayed nerves. Her own scars surfaced in response. The father's empty saddle, the mother's quiet unraveling, the vow she'd made to never look away from pain. "I get it," she whispered, the words bridging the gap between waitress and wanderer. "This place, this life, it's small but it's mine, and now with her." She trailed off, glancing at the girl, a fierce protectiveness blooming in her chest. Ethan reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers briefly, a touch that conveyed more than volumes of talk, solidarity, the quiet thunder of chosen kin. But peace, fractured with the crunch of tires on gravel, headlights slicing through the dark like accusatory beams. The relative's truck rolled back into view, slower this time, flanked by another vehicle, a sleek black SUV that screamed hired muscle. The taller man stepped out first, his face twisted in the headlight's glare, accompanied by a suited figure clutching a briefcase, the emblem of some legal firm glinting coldly. "We came to talk sense," the man called, voice oily with false civility, but his eyes darted to the Vipers, who rose as one, a wall of leather and resolve forming without a word. Ethan stood, easing out the door, Olivia following with Lily shielded behind her. The air thickened, charged with the scent of tension and hot rubber, the night's chill forgotten in the standoff's heat. The suited man stepped forward, papers rustling like dry leaves. "This is a family matter," he intoned, glancing at the officer's earlier notes scribbled in his file. "Temporary custody doesn't erase rights. The child returns with us tonight." Lily whimpered, burrowing into Olivia's side, the bear's fur matted against her cheek. Ethan's jaw set, the medallion a cool weight against his skin, Marcus's voice a phantom urging in his ear. "Rights?" he echoed, stepping into the light, his crew fanning out behind him like shadows given form. "You mean the kind that ignores a kid's fear? We've got witnesses, statements. This ends with her safe, not shuffled." Words escalated into a verbal fray, the lawyer citing clauses from invented safeguards, the relatives looming with barely veiled threats. Jax slipped away quietly, phone to his ear, rallying a contact from the Vipers network, an old ally in the justice mills who could unearth the rot beneath the claims. Tyler positioned himself near Lily, his voice a low murmur of reassurance, while Samuel and Logan flanked the newcomers, their presence a silent deterrent. Olivia held her ground, voice rising clear over the din. "She's not property. Look at her. That's your answer." The girl peeked out, eyes meeting the lawyer's, her small frame a testament to the moral chasm. As stars wheeled overhead, the confrontation teetered on a knife's edge, the desert wind whispering through the sage like a cautionary tale. Ethan's hand rested on his handlebars, ready to rev if words failed, but he clung to the promise, justice through integrity, not force. The lawyer faltered under the weight of unified stares, the relatives shifting uneasily as distant sirens hinted at reinforcements on the way. In that suspended breath, loyalty proved its mettle, weaving a net around the vulnerable, the night's darkness yielding to the faint glow of dawn's approach. Redemption wasn't a single ride, it was this, the unyielding stand, binding wounds into strength. The desert night held its breath, the standoff etched in stark contrasts of headlight glare and encroaching shadows, the air thick with the acrid bite of idling engines and unspoken threats. Olivia Harper's grip on Lily tightened, the girl's small body trembling against her like a leaf in the wind, the stuffed bear's button eyes reflecting the chaos like distant stars. The relative's truck loomed at one end of the parking lot, its grille a snarling maw, while the sleek SUV idled beside it, the lawyer's briefcase clutched like a shield. Ethan Ridge Callahan stood at the forefront of the Iron Vipers, his silhouette a bastion of leather and steel, the medallion at his throat pulsing with the rhythm of his steady heartbeat. Jax flanked him on the left, hand hovering near his pocket, where a phone still warmed from urgent calls. Tyler on the right, His ex-firefighter's instincts coiled like a spring, ready to shield without a spark of flame. The lawyer cleared his throat, papers rustling in the tense hush, his voice slicing through like a poorly tuned blade. "This is procedural, Mr. Callahan. The child's guardians have documentation. Temporary or not, blood ties prevail under the protection accord." He thrust a sheaf of forms toward the sheriff's deputy, who'd arrived in response to the sirens. The portly officer from earlier, now flanked by a younger partner, their badges catching the artificial glow. The taller relative stepped forward, his flannel shirt stained with sweat, eyes darting between the biker's unyielding line and Lily's huddled form. "See? It's all here. Girl's coming home where she belongs." But his words rang hollow, undercut by the flicker of unease in his stance, the way his partner shifted foot to foot like a cornered animal. Ethan didn't flinch, his gaze locking onto the lawyer's with the quiet intensity of a man who'd stared down worse than legalese in the haze of battlefield dust. The Vipers formed a living barrier, 54 souls bound by more than patches. Veterans like Samuel and Logan, their arms crossed in silent testament, mechanics and wanderers who'd traded chaos for code. The scent of warm asphalt and sagebrush sharpened as a breeze stirred, carrying the faint, metallic tang of impending rain from the distant horizon. "Blood ties?" Ethan echoed, his voice low and resonant, carrying over the murmur of the crew like the rumble of a gathering storm. "That what you call dragging a scared kid through the night? We've got eyes that saw the fear, ears that heard the pleas. This ain't about paper, it's about what's right." Olivia stepped forward then, Lily's hand in hers a lifeline, her apron still dusted with the day's flour like faint battle scars. The fluorescent light from the diner spilled out behind her, framing her in a halo of resolve, the jukebox inside faintly crooning a ballad of redemption lost and found. "She's told you herself," Olivia said, her tone steady, edged with the fire that had ignited this unlikely alliance. "Raised voices, hands that bruise, that's not home, it's a cage." Lily nodded from her shelter, her whisper cutting clearer than any shout. "I want to stay with her." The words hung in the air, a child's truth piercing the veil of adult machinations, drawing a hush from even the relatives, whose faces twisted in a mix of denial and dawning defeat. The deputy conferred with his partner, radio crackling softly with updates from the social workers' line, whispers of prior reports, unpaid fines, whispers of neglect buried in files. Jax leaned in, murmuring details gleaned from his contact. A pattern of evasion, a home more shadow than sanctuary. The lawyer blustered, citing clauses and delays, but the tide shifted as the social worker arrived unannounced, her sedan crunching gravel, folder in hand now bolstered by fresh inquiries. She approached Lily gently, kneeling to eye level, the desert wind tugging at her scarf. "Sweetheart, can you tell me again in your words?" Lily's voice trembled but held, fragments of night spent hiding, days of indifference, spilling out like pent-up rain. The woman's expression softened, then hardened toward the relatives. "This changes things. Immediate removal pending full review. The waitress, Ms. Harper, will serve as emergency guardian." Relief crashed through the group like a wave breaking on parched earth, the Vipers exhaling in unison, their boots shifting on the gravel in a subtle chorus of vindication. The relatives recoiled, the taller one lunging forward with a curse, but Tyler's arm shot out, not striking but stopping, a wall of quiet authority. "Walk away clean," Tyler said, his voice even, the scars on his arms a map of controlled fires. The lawyer gathered his papers, defeat etching lines on his face, and the men retreated to their vehicles, engines roaring to life in futile protest, taillights fading into the night like retreating ghosts. The deputy nodded to Ethan, a bridge of respect forming across old divides. "You folks did good tonight, kept it civil." Ethan clasped his forearm, the gesture sealing an unspoken pact. Had to, for the promise. As the officials departed, the lot emptied into a fragile peace, the stars emerging overhead like witnesses to the moral victory. Olivia sank onto the diner's steps, Lily curling into her side, the ice cream cone forgotten, but the bond solidified. The Vipers lingered, not as conquerors, but kin. Jax sharing a quiet laugh with Mabel over pie, Samuel showing Lily a trick with his bike's headlight that painted stars on the wall. Ethan knelt before them, his rough hand ruffling the girl's hair gently. "You're safe now, kid. We've got your back." Lily beamed, hugging her bear close, then reached out to touch the medallion at his neck, her small fingers tracing the eagle's wings. In that touch, Ethan saw Marcus's face, the oath fulfilled not in glory, but in guardianship, the weight lifting like dust in the wind. Dawn crept in slowly, painting the horizon in strokes of rose and gold, the desert awakening with the tentative calls of birds and the soft sigh of cooling metal. Olivia watched Ethan mount his Harley, the engine's growl, a farewell rumble that vibrated through the ground. "This changes everything," she said, voice thick with emotion, Lily waving from her hip. He nodded, the road calling, but the pull of this new family stronger. "For all of us, rides ongoing. Call if you need." The convoy formed once more, 54 bikes thundering to life, a serpent of loyalty coiling toward the sunrise, leaving trails of dust that shimmered like promises kept. In the quiet aftermath, Olivia carried Lily inside, the diner a sanctuary reborn, its neon sign flickering steadily now. Bonds forged in crisis endured, redemption a quiet legacy etched in hearts and highways. The lost ones had found their shield, and in standing for them, Ethan had reclaimed his own. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of unbreakable bonds and quiet heroes. Thank you for riding with us.